Welcome to the IWP Podcast, coming to you live from the Institute of World Politics in Washington, D.C. I'm Jim Robbins, Dean of Academics at IWP, an accredited graduate school of national security, intelligence, and international affairs, offering a variety of certificates, master's degrees, and doctorates, both in person and online. You can check out our programs and our courses at our website, iwp.edu. Don't look now, but the threat of globally networked terrorism is back. This week, 8 illegals from the Central Asian country of Tajikistan were rounded up by federal agents in New York, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia. They had entered the country through the southern border and were suspected of planning a terror attack. The group had been under surveillance for several months by a joint terrorism task force, and there was evidence that they were connected to ISIS. They allegedly had been discussing building bombs. A source close to the investigation told the New York Post, "Remember the Boston Marathon bombing? I'm afraid something like that might happen again, or worse." This isn't the only time Tajikistan has been in the news lately. In March, Russian authorities accused 4 Tajik nationals of carrying out a massive attack at a Moscow concert hall that killed at least 139 people. This roundup follows an event last month in Quantico, an attempt to infiltrate by what were identified as Jordanian nationals posing as Amazon delivery men. And the key thing to understand is that there are over 2 million Palestinians in Jordan, so it's critical to know exactly who these people were and what was motivating them. Allegedly, one came over the border illegally, was apprehended, and then released. The other overstayed a student visa. Members of Congress sent a letter to DHS and the FBI asking for more information because the White House is keeping a lid on this. Terrorism has always been a problem. We've controlled it, but terrorists are opportunists who exploit weakness and opportunities. We saw that in Israel with their lightly guarded border with Gaza. Hamas exploited that opening. Now our unguarded border has presented an opportunity, and our enemies would be fools to ignore it. Senior officials have been sending out the warning. FBI Director Christopher Wray testified before Congress that we've seen the threat from foreign terrorists rise to a whole nother level. He specifically drew attention to security gaps in the U.S. southern border, where thousands of people each week enter the country undetected. Wray has identified 3 different categories of threats to the U.S. homeland: international terrorism, domestic terrorism, and state-sponsored terrorism, particularly coming from Iran. Wray specifically mentioned the U.S.-Mexico border as a means of terrorists entering the country, saying that individuals who, when they come in, are armed with fake documents or sneak in some way where there's not enough derogatory information in the intelligence community to watch list them, their particular problem. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland also noted the border problem in separate testimony June 4th and said the terrorist threat level has gone up enormously. The warnings keep coming. Outgoing director of the National Counterterrorism Center, Christine Abizaid, described an elevated global threat environment while speaking at a security conference in Doha last month. She noted that ISIS-K reestablished itself in Afghanistan and is projecting out its network. We see the ISIS network sort of resettling after a period of disquiet, she said. The stability of the global ISIS enterprise, even without territorial solidity, the ability to reach out virtually to a network of supporters, some of whom are going to conduct attacks, is quite concerning. She called ISIS-K's ability to reestablish itself in Afghanistan probably the most significant additive capability we've seen to the global ISIS network in the last 3 years. And United States Central Command Commander General Eric Kurilla has warned about Mideast terrorist groups, including ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and especially ISIS-K. Despite assurances from the Taliban that these groups will not operate in their country, we seem to be seeing the global network the U.S. dismantled after 9/11 being reestablished. And CENTCOM has been busy. Last year, U.S. forces killed or captured almost 1,000 terrorists in Syria and Iraq. You don't hear about that in the media much, but that's a substantial number. 1,000 terrorists. Think about it. So where might an attack come? The New York Post source mentioned the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing, and it seems like sporting events are a particular potential target these days. In March, British football clubs were warned to be on the lookout for potential terrorist activity. There was ISIS chatter about attacking the Cricket World Cup in Nassau County, New York. Did you know the U.S. was hosting the Cricket World Cup? Well, the terrorists know. In April, there was a terror threat aimed at the Champions League football matches in Paris. Then there are the upcoming Paris Olympics, starting July 26th. In April, French officials said there was no terrorist threat for the Games. But in late May, French security disrupted several threats, one from someone allegedly affiliated with ISIS-K. A report by the cybersecurity firm Recorded Future states that despite a high likelihood of cyber attacks, the greatest risk to the Paris Games will come from in-person threats. The report assesses that physical security threats, including terrorism, violent extremism, civil unrest, and disruptive protests, pose the greatest risk for harm and disruption. The Olympics are a tempting target, with countries represented from all over the world, masses of spectators at the events, and saturation television and media coverage. Remember the 1972 Munich Olympics and the attack on Israeli athletes by the Palestinian Black September organization. 11 coaches and athletes were killed, including American-born weightlifter David Berger. The botched rescue operation played out on live TV. It was the first time that terrorists had hijacked such a large-scale televised event before an audience of almost 1 billion people. It demonstrated the power of this type of violence in the media age. So whether the targets are athletes from Israel or the United States, Europe, or other countries the terror groups have been focusing on, or the masses of international spectators there to enjoy the games, everyone should be aware of the terrorists' renewed potency and enduring grievances. Also here in the United States, where warnings and incidents connected to terrorist infiltration of the southern border are starting to accumulate, we need to be on guard. The 9/11 Commission said that the greatest failing before the 2001 attacks was a failure of imagination. The same might be said of the October 7th massacre in Israel. But today there is no excuse for lack of preparedness. We have been warned about the threat, and we can see it starting to manifest itself. It would only be through gross negligence for a major terrorist attack to take place in this country. So, pay attention. The bad guys are out there, and they are coming for us. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this podcast, please share and subscribe. For IWP, I'm Jim Robbins. Join us next week for another edition of the IWP Podcast.